Now, of course, when we think about functional design and we think about designing, we tend to think about allowing people to do what it is they want to do. And commonly, we would call this findability if it's content or features, or we'd call it usability if we're thinking about interaction design and functionality. And so here we're trying to just match what it is that the individual wants to do and say, yeah, let's make it clear and easy for them to do that thing they want to do. But when you're working on behalf of a business, quite often, in that moment when they're there and they're saying, hey, I've made a decision and I'm going to try and do this thing, we have this opportunity that in marketing is often called cross-sell or upsell. You can think about it as trying to encourage them to do something that's in line with what their goal is, but in some way benefits the business or platform more that we would like to encourage them to do. And so you have opportunities in design to offer these moments to encourage them to do something more aligned with the business. So in the case of donation flow for the American Red Cross, we as designers have to ask ourselves, is it better to number the steps, not number the steps? When we talk about the amount, should it be just a blank, fill in the blank, and we just let people put in however much it is? Is that going to be the best way to encourage them to donate? How's that going to work? Whether or not there's an emotional appeal. If here, as you see, they're able to actually attribute the donation in honor of someone, maybe who has passed or a loved one. Or is there an impact on having the denominations, the amounts, already spelled out, being there on the screen for them to choose? And oh, by the way, there's an impact with being a touch-friendly size in the design as well. And is there impact of photography on the way that that's handled? So does the order of the amounts, high to low or low to high, what are the upper ends? Should $1,000 be there or should it cap off at $500? What feels reasonable? What's going to actually encourage people to go through in the way that we would want them to and do that? And then maybe once they've made a selection, what influence does allowing them to target where the donation goes with that amount? By the way, if you go onto American Red Cross right now, after the Louisiana floods, you'll see that intentionally there's a specific selection added to these three that says, you know what, I'd like it to go towards helping people in the Louisiana flood. Why? Because you have that volume spike of people of interest, of wanting to help and empathy, and the intentionality of allowing them, oh, this is where I want it to go, is all a part of that way in which you're allowing them to achieve what they're doing. You also have within this the encourage. So encouraging them to make it actually a monthly donation. Now that they're here, can we set it to where it'll reoccur rather than just have it a one-time donation item? And then finally, if you think about the way in which American Red Cross works, sure, they help with disaster relief and getting crews out there and they accept donations for doing that, but a whole other half of their business is blood donation. Now you think it's difficult to people to encourage them to go and fill out a form or commit some money out of their pocket to doing that. Try getting them to show up in person on time at a scheduled 50-minute interval and give blood. So you really have to think about how you're going to get them to go out there and encourage them to show up in person as well. So I'd like to turn tables to another client case that we worked on. And this is something that everyone, just like with natural disasters, you can relate to. And that's many of us own cars and have all of the pain that comes with being a car owner, whether it's keeping it running well when nothing is wrong and maintenance and care, or if something has gone wrong and now I need to decide how am I going to fix it, what do I need to do? And so we, for a number of years, have had Pep Boys as a client. And in addition to these typical service and emergency and maintenance things, they also have another dynamic that's going on in that industry. And that is that, while historically maybe they had quite a large percentage of their business is people that are do-it-yourselfers, where what they're really doing is just buying parts from them, right? They're a delivery and they're going to go and do the work. But of course, by and large, most of us just want you to do it for me. We just want the service, right? So it becomes like a service-oriented business for them. And if you think about that omnichannel journey, they're physical places. Where the car is, where the actual mechanics are, that's where it actually has to happen. And so the whole industry is shifting to where fewer and fewer people, of course, are able to work on their computerized cars. So they have this shift going on, and they're thinking about what do we need to do within this. So in trying to help them think about this goal, whether or not those moments where I know I need to maintain it once every 10,000 miles, or that something's gone wrong and I have an emergency and I need it repaired, we had to help them think about how should we address in this strategic planning phase their goal. And so we took what for many folks would see as a typical kind of service design approach, where we're able to go out and actually do contextual inquiry. We're able to do usability testing with their scheduling flow. We actually did follow-ups of people after they went and had their car worked on. We followed around. We had follow-up interviews, trying to gain an understanding of point of sale and retail and the relationship between the online scheduling process and actually getting the work done when you drive the car up and are willing to wait for an hour and a half. Now, in part, this resulted in customer journey, where we took a look at each of those phases that they're going through, and what are they thinking? What are the questions that they have? And so in this point where they're done shopping for a provider and they've decided on Pep Boys as their client, and now they're going to make an appointment. At this decision point there, we had to think about, okay, how do we support what they're doing and maybe encourage them to do other things? So you've decided now you're going to get your car worked on, and you decided it's going to be Pep Boys because there's one in the neighborhood and you're able to take it there. So you get to this decision point. Now, the scheduling flow that we had to work with as we're starting out did have problems. It had usability problems, it had development problems. You can see these bugs here, but they also had a fundamental issue that they had not made it possible to use the online appointment scheduler to do all of their services. They had only a limited number of services because of the complexity of knowing what availability they had around mechanics and bays and whatnot. So they had this underlying complexity. And they also had legacy content that was out there that maybe had been targeted towards do-it-yourselfer that became less and less relevant as that audience became smaller and smaller. And really what they want to do is encourage people to have the service done with Pep Boys. So this is a look at one of the initial redesigns of the scheduling flow, and there are a number of things that we were able to do in improving it. So the business made a decision to offer more services. So this is key. If they're not even there and available to you to, say, get your state inspection done in addition to having the brakes looked at or having the battery checked or replaced, et cetera, you don't even have that option within that channel. And by having them be a part of a unified flow, we actually now encourage them to look at optimizing their time. If they're going to be there for an hour anyway, but they can get 2 or 3 things done that they need to get done, the easeability, the ease of being able to wrap those up would help really encourage them to bundle in the services that they're going to be using. Now, it's not enough just to make it easy for them to schedule, because if they schedule it and don't show up, we're now holding time in a bay where we think we've got a mechanic who's got an hour, hour and a half's worth of work, and then they don't show up. The business gets no revenue, right? Nobody pays anything for not showing up there. So really, it's measuring, did they actually follow through and show up? So I'd like to talk about this idea of the measured result and how we're performing on the web. So if you think about, in this model, the x-axis as what we intend the design to either prevent or allow or encourage. And if you think about the y-axis as what we're actually measuring in the overall systems, what did they do? Did they do what they wanted to do when we were going to allow them? When we tried to encourage them, did they do that? And so if you think about the elements down here and the unintended, the intended, where we're not letting them do it, right? So we're preventing them and preventing. This is a lack of features of functionality, right? If you think about things that fall into this area where we intend to allow them to do it and their goal is they want to do it, but they're not, well, really we can categorize that when we actually see that in the interactions and the analytics as a findability or usability problem, right? We meant to let them do it, but they weren't able to. And then finally, if you think about where we're trying to encourage them to do something of a higher order, maybe better for the business, but they consistently only do the thing that they intended to do in the first place, really what we have here is a kind of a marketing and promotion, or maybe even a persuasive design issue where we're not encouraging them in the appropriate way or well enough. And so we'll take a look in a second at the way in which this applies to Pep Boys directly. So the other piece I mentioned is content, where they had this legacy content and thinking about the role that content plays. And so when we were able to measure and look at the way in which content was being utilized, only 5% of all of their visitors actually looked at content. And when you start slicing, measuring that audience, it turned out that 70% of those that were looking at the content, they were actually coming in from search. So what that tells us is that the content is doing a good job of SEO and getting people to come there, but what it's not doing is converting to people actually scheduling service. And we are also able to measure what keywords are they using. So what are actually the top issues on people's minds? What are they coming in for? So we know that people are looking for battery, and they're looking for alternators, and they're looking for tires. And so these measuring what they're looking for helps us decide perhaps what services should be put online, what to promote, and what pages to redesign to point them to the actual appointment scheduling flow. So how did our work, taking this approach and redesigning the appointment scheduling work? Well, at the launch of this redesigned flow, their overall conversion from the beginning of the appointment flow to actually completing and finishing it, up 60% with the redesign work. And the number of appointments that were made online doubled. Now, in part, we can attribute this to the redesign of the scheduling, but it also has a lot to do with the additional services that were put on there as well. But the real proof in a case where you need someone physically show up, bring their car, spend the time, wait the hour, hour and a half, is whether or not they actually show up and pay for it. And the results of this were 83% increase in revenue based on the redesign. So it means people are actually showing up and completing the service.